In the late 1960s, the world of American stock car racing was heating up. Dodge, a brand already known for muscle cars, was facing serious trouble on the high-speed tracks of NASCAR. Cars like the Ford Torino Talladega and the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler II were beating Dodge on the oval circuits. Dodge knew that if they wanted to keep up, they could not just rely on their usual flashy looks and big engines. They had to go faster, and to go faster, they had to cut through the air better. That is how the story of the 1969 Dodge Charger 500 began. The regular Dodge Charger was not exactly bad, but it had problems. The recessed grille on the front and the strange rear window that dipped inward caused too much wind resistance. At high speeds, especially on NASCAR's superspeedways like Daytona and Talladega, that wind acted like an invisible wall. The Charger was fast, but was getting pushed around by air like a kite on a windy day. Dodge engineers got to work, not with magic, but with careful, simple changes. First, they took the front grille from the 1968 Dodge Coronet and slapped it onto the Charger 500, making it flush with the body. This might sound like a small fix, but removing that front-end air trap made the car slice through the air more smoothly. Then they tackled the rear window. The Charger's usual rear glass was sunken in, looking cool but acting like a parachute. For the Charger 500, Dodge made the window line up flush with the roof so air would not grab the back of the car like before. These two changes, though not fancy, made the Charger 500 more competitive. NASCAR rules required Dodge to build at least 500 of these cars for regular buyers before they could race them, which is why they named it the Charger 500. Ironically, they only made 392 cars, which must have made someone in the office a little nervous. Under the hood, buyers could choose between two engines. The first was the 440 Magnum V8 with a displacement of 7.2 liters. This engine made 375 horsepower and 651 newton-meters of torque. The second option was the famous 426 HEMI V8, a 7.0-liter engine making 425 horsepower and 664 newton-meters of torque. Not bad for a car that still had a full steel body and weighed about 3,672 pounds. With the HEMI engine, the Charger 500 could hit 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 5.7 seconds, and it could finish a quarter-mile run in just 13.48 seconds, crossing the line at around 175 kilometers per hour. That was very fast for 1969, even if today's family minivans would not be too impressed. The Charger 500 came with two transmission options, a 3-speed automatic torque flight or a 4-speed manual for those who preferred to work for their speed. Some versions also came with the Special Edition package, adding leather seat inserts, a wood grain steering wheel, and wood grain dashboard panels, because even racers like a little comfort. In the end, the 1969 Dodge Charger 500 laid the groundwork for the even more extreme Dodge Charger Daytona. Although the Charger 500 did not win as much as Dodge hoped, it helped them learn important lessons about aerodynamics. With only 392 units built and only 67 fitted with the 426 HEMI, the Charger 500 became a rare sight, both on the track and on the street. It may not have changed NASCAR overnight, but it sure gave the wind a harder time. In the mid-1960s, American streets were changing. Cars were getting faster, louder, and more powerful. People were racing at stoplights, talking about horsepower at every coffee shop, and dreaming about dominating the quarter mile. This was the birth of the muscle car era. While everyone talks about the Pontiac GTO, Chevrolet Chevelle SS, and Ford Fairlane GT, there was another player that often stayed just a bit quieter, but packed just as much punch. It was the 1966 Oldsmobile 442 W30. Yes, that is not a typo. It is spelled 442. Oldsmobile, a division of General Motors, had stepped into the muscle car game, and they did it in their own style. No flashy marketing tricks, just numbers and steel. Oldsmobile had introduced the 442 back in 1964 as a performance package for the Oldsmobile Cutlass and F85 models. At first, 442 stood for a 4-barrel carburetor, a 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhausts. By 1965, Oldsmobile changed the meaning, and now it referred to a 400 cubic inch engine, a 4-barrel carburetor, and dual exhausts. The 442 was already making a name for itself when Oldsmobile engineers decided it needed something extra. That extra became the W30 package, introduced quietly in 1966. The W30 was like a secret weapon. While the regular 1966 Oldsmobile 442 already had muscle, the W30 added more power and special equipment. The main ingredient was the L78 6.6-liter V8 engine, producing 355 horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute and 603 newton-meters of torque at 3,600 revolutions per minute. If you were feeling fancy, you could choose the L69 version, which had a Tri-Carb setup, meaning 3 2-barrel carburetors, boosting the horsepower to 365. Not bad for a car that still looked like it could be driven by your neighbor's accountant. The W30 package was more than just carburetors and power ratings. Oldsmobile engineers moved the battery to the trunk to help balance the weight. They added a unique force air induction system where big tubes snaked from behind the front bumper to deliver cool air directly into the engine. It almost looked like plumbing from a kitchen sink, but it worked. The W30 also received a hotter camshaft for better breathing and faster acceleration. Despite all these changes, the official horsepower numbers stayed close to the standard versions. Oldsmobile was likely trying to keep insurance companies from panicking. Production numbers for the W30 were shockingly low. Only 54 cars came from the factory with the W30 setup. They were spread across different body styles like the Cutlass 442 Holiday Hardtop Coupe, Sport Coupe, and Convertible, as well as the F85 Deluxe Holiday Coupe and Club Coupe. The rarest of them all was the Cutlass 442 Sport Coupe W30, with just 5 built. This made the W30 versions especially hard to find even when they were new. The 442 W30 had respectable performance numbers for its time. It could go from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 6.3 seconds and finish the quarter mile in around 14.8 seconds at 156 kilometers per hour. The car had a wheelbase of 2,946 millimeters, a length of 5,187 millimeters, a width of 1,915 millimeters, and a height of 1,364 millimeters. Its weight was roughly 3,750 pounds, depending on the options. Not exactly light, but then again, most muscle cars back then were more heavyweight boxers than sprinters. Inside, you could get a 3-speed manual as standard, or go for the 4-speed manual or the 2-speed Jetaway automatic transmission. The suspension was sturdy, with coil springs and a stabilizer bar at the front, and a 4-link setup with coil springs at the rear. Drum brakes were used on all 4 corners. Not the best by modern standards, but it got the job done, most of the time. Today, the 1966 Oldsmobile 442 W30 is remembered as a rare and special car from Lansing, Michigan. While it might not have shouted as loudly as some of its competitors, it knew exactly what it was doing. It showed that sometimes the quiet ones might just surprise you when the light turns green. In the year 1966, Pontiac did something a little different. They introduced a car that was not exactly a GTO and not exactly a regular family Catalina either. It was something in between. It was called the 1966 Pontiac Catalina 2+2. Many people today might not know much about it, but back then, it caught the attention of those who wanted power, style, and a bit of flash, without fully jumping into the full-on muscle car scene. It was almost like Pontiac quietly saying, "Hey, if you know, you know." The Catalina 2+2 started as a special package in 1964, but by 1966, Pontiac decided to give it its own identity. It was no longer just a package option. It became its own model, available only as a 2-door hardtop coupe or a convertible. Pontiac, part of General Motors and based in Pontiac, Michigan, wanted to offer something that stood out but without stealing the entire show from the famous Pontiac GTO. So, the 2+2 became the GTO's bigger cousin, the one that maybe had a little more weight but also had more presence. The The 1966 Pontiac Catalina 2+2 had a few noticeable features on the outside. The body had what people called a Coke bottle shape because it curved in the middle like an old glass soda bottle. There were louvered fender trims, twin tail lights, and vertical air slots behind the doors. The 2+2 badges were placed proudly on the rear fenders and deck lid so people knew you were driving something a little different. Inside, it came with vinyl bucket seats, a center console, and door panels that gave it a sportier feel compared to the regular Catalina. It might not have been as fancy as some European sports cars, but it did its job well. Under the hood, things got even more serious. The standard engine was a 6.9-liter V8 engine, or as Americans called it, 421 cubic inches. It made 338 horsepower at 4,600 revolutions per minute. If someone wanted more power, they could go for the optional tri-power setup. This added 3 two-barrel carburetors and bumped the power up to 376 horsepower. This was not just numbers on paper. It could really move. With the tri-power setup and a 4-speed manual transmission, the Catalina 2+2 could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour, or 0 to 96.5 kilometers per hour, in about 7.2 seconds and finish a quarter mile in around 15.5 seconds. Not too bad for a car that weighed over 2 tons and could still fit your whole family, and maybe even your neighbors. Pontiac offered different transmission choices, including a 3-speed manual with a hearse floor shifter, a 4-speed manual, and a 3-speed turbo hydromatic automatic. These choices gave buyers options depending on how much they wanted to work while driving. The car's wheelbase measured 3,073 millimeters, with an overall length of 5,456 millimeters and a width of 2,024 millimeters. The front track was 1,600 millimeters, while the rear track was 1,630 millimeters. It rolled on 8.25x14 tires, which kept it planted, at least most of the time. In total, Pontiac built 6,382 units of the 2+2 in 1966. Out of these, 2,208 had manual transmissions, while 4,175 came with the hydromatic automatic transmission. Pontiac's choice to limit production turned the 2+2 into a rare sight today, though it was never intended to be a collector's car back then. It was simply another option on the lot, sitting next to cars like the Pontiac Le Mans, Pontiac Bonneville, and, of course, the Pontiac GTO. Today, the 1966 Pontiac Catalina 2+2 is remembered by enthusiasts as that slightly mysterious cousin of the GTO. It was not the fastest, not the flashiest, but it was different. It was like that quiet kid in school who did not say much, but when it came time to run the 100-meter sprint, they shocked everyone. In the late 1960s, American streets were filled with the sound of roaring engines. Cars were not just a way to get from one place to another, they were loud, bold, and full of power. General Motors was right in the middle of this action, and one of its brands, Buick, wanted a piece of the muscle car craze. Buick was mostly known for its comfortable and smooth-riding cars, but in 1965, they decided to try something different. They introduced the Buick Grand Sport, also called the Buick GS. This was Buick's way of saying, we can be tough too. Over the next few years, the Grand Sport models kept improving. Then came the 1968 Buick GS 400 Stage 1, a car that still gets attention today. The story begins with Buick designing the GS 400 in 1967, which had a 400 cubic inch engine, equal to 6.6 liters. It produced 340 horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute and 440 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. That was plenty of muscle, but Buick engineers wanted to push it even more. In 1968, they added the Stage 1 package. The Stage 1 version of the Buick GS 400 included changes that made the engine breathe better and run stronger. It got a more aggressive camshaft, which is like giving the engine an extra cup of strong coffee. The carburetor was also special. Buick used a Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor, tuned to deliver more fuel exactly when the engine needed it. The compression ratio was raised to 11.0 to 1, which helped the engine make more power. Buick also improved the valves, adding larger intake valves that measured 2.13 inches and exhaust valves at 1.755 inches. This allowed the engine to pull in more air and push out more exhaust, making it quicker. The Stage 1 package officially raised the horsepower to 345. Some drivers said it felt even stronger, but Buick, like many manufacturers at the time, liked to play it safe on paper. The car came with a few choices when it came to shifting gears. Drivers could pick a 3-speed manual transmission, a 4-speed manual transmission, or the Turbo Hydromatic 400, a 3-speed automatic transmission that was smooth but tough enough to handle all that power. Buick also gave the GS 400 Stage 1 a limited slip differential called positraction. It helped both rear wheels grip the road better. Depending on if you wanted air conditioning or not, the rear axle ratio was either 3.64 to 1 or 3.42 to 1. The suspension and brakes were not forgotten either. The front suspension used unequal length A-arms with coil springs and a solid anti-roll bar measuring 24 millimeters. The rear suspension used coil springs too, along with a solid axle and another anti-roll bar measuring 22 millimeters. The front brakes were 279 millimeter discs with single piston calipers, and the rear brakes were 241 by 51 millimeter drums. This setup kept the big Buick under control. Speaking of size, the GS 400 Stage 1 was not small. It had a wheelbase of 2,845 millimeters, an overall length of 5,098 millimeters, a width of 1,920 millimeters, and stood about 1,346 millimeters tall. It weighed a good amount too, making it more of a heavyweight fighter than a lightweight sprinter. Performance tests at the time showed that the Buick GS 400 Stage 1 could go from 0 to 97 kilometers per hour in about 7.7 seconds and finish the quarter mile in around 15.9 seconds at about 143 kilometers per hour. Not bad for a car that could comfortably fit your parents, your friends, and maybe even a couch if you tried hard enough. Only a limited number of these cars were made, making the 1968 Buick GS 400 Stage 1 a car that collectors still search for today. Buick might have been the brand your grandparents liked, but with the Stage 1, they proved they could also build something that could make your neighbors complain about the noise.